On paper, this matchup doesn't make a whole lot of sense. A dedicated cinema camera versus a cell phone. $8,000 versus $1,000. And while the sensor in the C70 is much larger than the sensor found in the iPhone 14 Pro, Apple is very good at software, and they've done a lot to squeeze as much as they can out of this little device. Today's video is going to be less about which one of these two is better and more about how does the iPhone 14 Pro stack up against a dedicated cinema camera like the Canon C70. And now before I show you some of the footage from the field, I wanted to do a little test here in the studio. So what we're going to do is swap out my Canon R6, which I'm shooting on right now, for the Canon C70 and see how that looks. And then we'll swap that out for the iPhone 14 Pro and see how both of these cameras do in a studio environment. And now here we are with the C70. It's a little tighter of a framing because I wanted to match the 24mm for the iPhone 14 Pro. And we're also shooting in C-Log 2. C-Log 2 is the preferred gamma that I like to shoot in when I am using the C70. It gives you the most latitude out of the sensor and the most flexibility in post. And we also are shooting with eye autofocus for the first time. So Canon just last week updated the C70 with a new firmware enabling eye autofocus, better bit rates, autofocus at 120 frames, and a few other just minor tweaks. And I do want to give a shout out to Canon. The C70's been out for almost 2 years, and over those 2 years, Canon is constantly updating it with RAW, with better frame rates, better bit rates, just constantly updating through firmware. And for a camera manufacturer to do that is pretty awesome. So I appreciate Canon for that. But this is what the C70 looks like in a studio environment, and we're going to switch to the iPhone 14 Pro now and see how that looks. Here we are with the iPhone 14 Pro in cinematic mode. So I wanted to do two tests, one in ProRes, one in cinematic mode. So this is cinematic mode. It is 8-bit, but you do get that fake depth of field. So hopefully this looks good. And now let's switch to ProRes, which gives you that full 10-bit. And now this is the iPhone 14 Pro in ProRes. So this is true 10-bit footage. It should be a little sharper, a little crisper than the cinematic mode, but let me know which one you prefer. Also, we're gonna switch to the audio of the iPhone 14 Pro. So this is just a quick example of what the audio might sound like versus a boom mic, which is typically how I film these videos. And so if you are going to use the iPhone 14 Pro as your main camera, this is kind of what it would look like and what it would sound like. So let's go into the field. I have footage from the C70 and footage from the iPhone 14 Pro, and we'll roll the C70 footage first, then the iPhone 14 Pro, and you can decide for yourself which one you like more. footage out of the iPhone 14 Pro is surprisingly good. If I had two major gripes is I think that the footage is a little too sharp and it's a little noisy for my taste, especially the shadows are fairly noisy. I also did a quick comparison where I shot in Rec 709. The C70 in Rec 709 is just straight out of camera, and I also did the same with the iPhone 14 Pro, and so this is just comparing colors straight out of camera without any kind of post-production tweaking or anything like that. And I think that Canon still has better colors straight out of camera. Apple has a little bit of work to do when it comes to color, but they're definitely on the right path. With that being said, I am going to be sticking with the Canon C70 as my main cinema camera. The dynamic range, the way that the image looks coming out of camera, just the look and feel of the footage, that is why you spend the money for a cinema camera. That is why Arri charges so much for their cameras, why Red charges so much for their cameras. The look and feel out of a true cinema camera, there's just something about the footage that makes it feel more organic, makes it just look that much more natural. Phones like the iPhone 14 Pro are definitely narrowing that gap between phone and cinema camera. I still think that there is a place for cameras like the C70, and there probably will be for a very long time. I hope you guys found this comparison helpful or entertaining at the very least. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another one.